Today I am going to be ranking the Beatles American albums. Now, I grew up in the 1970s, and the first Beatle albums that I ever owned were the American versions. I wasn't even aware that there was a difference between the American versions and the British versions. I wasn't aware that there was a separate catalog, that there's a Parlophone label over in the UK and the Capitol label over in America, even though they were all under the umbrella of EMI. And it wasn't until I was reading one of the Beatles biographies and I started seeing titles like Please Please Me and Beatles for Sale and With the Beatles, and not wondering, wondering what are these albums that you're talking about? They're nothing like the albums that I was accustomed to in America. And so I've done a list of my favorite Beatle albums. And this one, I'm going to rank every single American Beatle album, including the soundtracks. And if I leave any out, I don't think I did, but I'm including albums that were just strictly American releases. And I think I've pretty much covered all of them. I'm not covering like the Canadian releases, greatest hits compilations. I'm just talking about more or less the American albums that just featured studio tracks on them. And I don't actually know how many there are, but I'm just going to start from my least favorite to my most favorite. Least favorite is going to be the Help soundtrack, only because there's really only 7 true songs on here. Like when I'm ranking my UK Beatle albums, I always put Yellow Submarine at the bottom just because there's too much instrumental stuff on there, and that's the same for Help. I mean, the songs that are on here are great, but I don't like having to skip around over the instrumental tracks. Not a huge fan of the Help soundtrack score that George Martin did here, so that's my reasoning. I love the Help tracks on here. I love the title track. I love The Night Before. You've Got to Hide Your Love Away. You're Gonna Lose That Girl. Ticket to Ride is all great, but only because you're really only getting half an album on here is why I'm ranking that one at the bottom. The same is going to be for the Hard Day's Night soundtrack, just because, again, it's about half an album's worth of Beatles songs and then half an album of instrumentals. I really do like the tracks that are on here, but there's some duplication with Something New. I'm just going to rank this because it's essentially an EP or half an album if you don't count the instrumental stuff. Hey Jude is going to come next, and this, to me, it doesn't flow well as a cohesive album. It's more, you can almost call it a greatest hits, I suppose, or a best of to some extent. You've got some, the album packaging, it's the Beatles 1969, August of 1969, and yet the first tracks on here are from 5 years earlier. You've got I Should Have Known Better. You've got Can't Buy Me Love, Paperback Writer, Rain is on here. So you got some older stuff, and then side 2 of this album is, about the most coherent side of songs here. The rest of it, it's all right. I like having Hey Jude and Revolution on an album, but just as a whole album, it doesn't do a whole lot for me. Beatles' second album, and the early Beatles stuff I'm not quite as big a fan of as some of their later stuff. Particularly, there's just so many covers on here. You've got Roll Over Beethoven, You Really Got a Hold on Me, Devil in Her Heart, Money, Long Tall Sally, Please Mr. Postman. Just too many covers on one album for my liking. I do like a lot the Beatle original tracks that are on here. I Call Your Name is great. Thank You Girl, I like a lot. You Can't Do That, obviously, is fantastic. And then the She Loves You, I'll Get You single, but still not my favorite Beatle tracks, considering the era that we're talking about here. So ranking that one a bit lower. Something New, the songs that are on here I really do like. I love Things We Said Today. I'll Cry Instead is great. Anytime at All. When I Get Home, one of my favorite early Beatles songs. But you've got the German version of I Want to Hold Your Hand. You've got some duplication with the Hard Day's Night soundtrack with Tell Me Why and I Love Her, Happy Just to Dance with You, If I Fell. So just by virtue of the fact that you do have that overlap between the two albums, this one is ranking a bit lower in my list of Beatle albums. Now the next two, excuse me, the next two here are essentially the same album, just in different running order. You've got the early Beatles, which was released in early 1965, once Capitol retained the rights to the Beatles' first album of material. I like a lot the songs that are on here. I think they're all just really fantastic. I love the early singles, Love Me Do, Please Please Me. Just a great collection of songs on here. I don't know which one I prefer more about the other. It's almost a tie here because essentially you have pretty much the same track. This one does have Misery and There's a Place, which early Beatles does not have, but it also, this particular version that I have doesn't have P.S. I Love You on it or Love Me Do. I know there's another version of Introducing the Beatles that does have those songs, but nonetheless, those two albums are going to feature next in my ranking. Now, some of you are going to think, well, wait a minute, this is part of the UK albums or the Beatles' original albums, but essentially it really is an American album. It was released as an album in America. It was released as an EP in Great Britain. So America is calling dibs on this one. We are staking a claim to this as an American album. It is on the Capitol label, after all, and just a unmatched collection of songs. I remember when I bought this, I went to the mall and I was so excited to get it because there were so many songs that I loved on here. Magical Mystery Tour, I Am the Walrus, Hello Goodbye, Strawberry Fields Forever, Penny Lane. It was just such a cornucopia of great Beatles songs, and I remember taking it home and just playing it over and over and over again. And I didn't have the booklet. The version that I had was the late 70s version after they stopped printing the booklet with it. So I didn't have that. All you had were the lyrics and then the little bit on the other side of the gatefold, which talked a little bit about, it had the track listing and, you know, a little bit about the wizards and, you know, that whole thing. So I have always had a real soft spot in my heart for this album, and that's why I am ranking it near the top. Just a great collection of psychedelic 1967 Beatles tracks and a great follow-up to Sgt. Pepper. Gonna go with Beatles VI for my next ranking. Again, I've always just loved this as an album. I think it hangs together really well. It's a great follow-up to the previous American album, which was Beatles 65. 8 Days a Week on here is a great track. I Don't Want to Spoil the Party. You've got some influences, some country influences, some Carl Perkins influences, Bob Dylan. You know, still the Beatles were heavily drawing on, you know, his sound for some of the tracks. What You're Doing is great. Obviously, in hindsight, I know that a large majority of these tracks were pulled from the Beatles for Sale album, but to me, I always thought, well, this was their studio follow-up to Beatles 65. Tell Me What You See, and Every Little Thing is such a great album closer. And it's weird for me now to listen to the Beatles for Sale album and to not hear Kansas City as an album opener, to not hear What You're Doing opening side 2, and to not hear Every Little Thing closing out side 2. So I really enjoy this album, and I still almost prefer the way the songs are sequenced over how they appear on Beatles for Sale. You can call it blasphemy, whatever, but that's just the way I feel. So we are down to the top 4 right now. Number 4 is going to be Yesterday and Today, the harder rocking companion piece to Rubber Soul. You got the leftover Rubber Soul from the British UK Rubber Soul tracks on here. You've got a couple of singles. You got Day Tripper, We Can Work It Out. You've got Yesterday on here. Nowhere Man, Dr. Robert, And Your Bird Can Sing, and I'm Only Sleeping, which were sort of previews for the UK Revolver album, which was actually released after yesterday and today. I just think it hangs together really well. And as an album, I think it's a great snapshot of the Beatles in 1965, late 1965, early 1966. Number 3 is Meet the Beatles, one of the first Beatle albums also that I owned. And I remember this album being in my aunt's record collection, my uncle's record collection. My mom had it in her record collections. All my friends' parents had this album in their record collection. It was such an important album for 1964. And really, it captures that excitement of early Beatlemania and just the energy and the great songwriting that's on here. And each Beatle gets their turn in the spotlight. George has got a great, one of his first compositions, Don't Bother Me, is a great track. Ringo's song, I Want to Be Your Man, which the Beatles gave to the Rolling Stones, also is a great track. I Want to Hold Your Hand. This is so perfect as an album opener. I saw her standing there, even though it was released a year before. It doesn't sound at all out of place on here. It fits in well. Little Child is great. Hold Me Tight. It Won't Be Long. I mean, I could go on and on, but it's just a flawless album. Now we're into my top 2. And I really didn't have to debate this too much. With some lists that I do, I'm like, oh, well, on any given day, my number 2 could be number 1, or my number 3 and number 2 or number 1 could all switch places. But really, I'm locked in on these 2 just because they've always been my favorite American Beatle albums. And I don't know that that's ever going to change. It's just the way it is. Number 2 is going to be Beatles 65. I still remember the day my dad came home from work and gave this to me. He had bought it at a record store on the way home. And again, I listened to it from start to finish over and over and over again. And it sounds so fantastic in the fake stereo. I'm sorry, I know, but that's how I remember just the heavily reverbed versions of She's a Woman and I Feel Fine on here. I love just kind of that, you know, you got the folky Bob Dylan influence of I'm a Loser. No Reply is a great track. Babies in Black with kind of the Everly Brothers harmonies. Rock and Roll Music is a great cover. I'll Follow the Sun is actually one of the Beatles songs that dates actually like one of the first songs I think that Paul ever wrote. Honey Don't is great. I'll Be Back, which they pulled from the UK, A Hard Day's Night. And Everybody's Trying to Be My Baby is a great showcase for George and his affection for Carl Perkins. So my number 1 American album, you can probably guess by process of elimination, is going to be Rubber Soul. And do I prefer this to the British version? Yes, I do. And I'll tell you why, because I think it holds together as such a brilliant folk rock album. I can't imagine the album not starting out with I've Just Seen a Face. It was such a shock to me to hear Drive My Car when I first got the British album on CD, thinking, wait a minute, that's not right. I'm just so used to I've Just Seen a Face starting off this album, straight into Norwegian Wood, from acoustic to acoustic, and then You Won't See Me, Think for Yourself, The Word, Michelle. Nowhere Man does not belong on Rubber Soul. I'm sorry, I know that's the way the Beatles sequenced it, but to these ears and what I grew up with, Nowhere Man sounds very out of place. You know another song that doesn't belong on the US or the Rubber Soul album is What Goes On. It just doesn't sound right to me. I think It's Only Love is a great way to start off side 2. And again, following again with the acoustic nature of the album, Girl, I'm Looking Through You, In My Life, Wait and Run for Your Life are just excellent. Was I? It's so funny. It's like, which way to hold the cover? Oh. But that is my favorite American Beatle album. And yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you think you would have ranked them any differently, let's talk about it. Let's have a dialogue. So let me know what you think. As always, if you haven't subscribed, make sure that you hit the subscribe button. Hope you're doing well, and everybody take care.